To Ostendio's webinar. We have a webinar for you today about 5 proven ways to boost your security and compliance program. So welcome to our webinar again this morning. My name's Miranda Elliott. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at Ostendio. I just want to remind you of a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and a recording will be available later for you, and we will send you the link to that. All attendees are on mute. We would love you to use the Q&A feature on Zoom or the chat feature on LinkedIn Live, and we will handle your questions towards the end of the webinar. So thank you for your questions. We look forward to being able to discuss them with you. I would love to introduce you to our speakers today. I am happy to introduce you to Kevin Brown and Marcos Martinez, both from Ostendio. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Kevin. He's our Information Security Officer at Ostendio. He also spearheads our professional services team. He boasts an impressive background of over 24 years in the technology and compliance sector. Kevin has held pivotal roles, including a stint at a Verizon division, focusing on healthcare, IT compliance, and certification. That was followed by an impactful tenure with the advisory wing of the auditor firm Drummond Group. Now Kevin brings his expertise and insights to Ostendio, and we're very happy to have him here with us today. I would also like to introduce you to Marcos. Marcos Martinez is our Senior Product Manager at Ostendio. Marcos began his career with 2 years of dedicated service with AmeriCorps, FEMA, and the Department of Homeland Security, and then over 10 years in the nonprofit sector, focusing on the intersection of data outcomes and social work with achievement and mentoring gaps in schools, DEI, and mental health. And we're very happy to have Marcos joining us for our webinar today. So let's get started. I am going to hand this over to Kevin. I'm going to be moving the slides along for Kevin this morning. So when you're ready for the next slide, Kevin, just tell me to move the slide along.
All right, let's get started. So where we want to start today is going to be about overcoming the pitfalls of an audit-driven security program. So, during my career, one of the things I've noticed is a lot of organizations, they build their compliance program around when they have an audit. So whether it's pursuing a new certification for the first time or doing an interim audit to maintain an existing certification, it's something that a lot of times gets put off until the audit is coming up. And the challenge there is that, you end up making a lot of mistakes when you take that approach. What we really recommend here, and what I've seen to be the most effective thing throughout the industry, whether it's in healthcare, finance, whatever the vertical is, security is about having good controls to protect against risks. Compliance is providing evidence of those controls. So security really needs to come first. It needs to be part of your culture, and good security isn't derived from a good compliance program. A good compliance program is derived from a good security program. So do your security first, compliance will follow. All right. And part of what that means is, a lot of times you don't want to pull staff away from revenue producing projects to have them, scramble to get compliance tasks done, right? That's ineffective. It leads to people wanting to take shortcuts. It's not effective. It's not efficient. And it really impacts your ability to be successful as an organization. So what you really want to do is you want to build a compliance program that sets things out over a period of time. When you look at tasks that you have to do, like risk assessments, testing a business continuity or incident response plan, doing vulnerability scans, all of those things take time, especially if you're using a third party. If you wait till your audit is coming up, you start to find that you're running out of time. Maybe you don't have the budget available in the time frame needed. Maybe the organization you used last year, their schedule is full and they can't perform it in time. It really puts you in a corner and forces you to make decisions you otherwise probably don't want to make. The other challenge that you have is being able to compile all the evidence. Now, in the 24 years I've been working in security and compliance, one of the things I've seen a lot of organizations do is as the audit is coming up, they start to pull together evidence. And back in the day, that meant going to filing cabinets and digging through looking for records of like employee training or job descriptions, that sort of things. Maybe you had a file server somewhere where you had policies and procedures written, but you didn't know who had reviewed them, you didn't know who had approved them, you didn't know when they were last updated. So you're trying to pull all this evidence together, and hopefully you're even able to do it before the audit. Worst case scenario, the auditor's in a conference room and you're walking out of the room to go find a person to go pull files, or you're searching your hard drive for copies of documents. So again, it's a very inefficient process. It lengthens the audit itself, but it also decreases the chance of having successful audit, which is how you want to demonstrate that you have a good ISMP, information security management program. So it's really critical to make sure that you build your security program as part of that culture to run over a period of time, and not to be something that you're scrambling to do within a month or two right before your audit. Next slide, please. So, one of the keys here is how do you demonstrate that compliance without adding to your budget? Now, certainly, when you're building your compliance program, there's going to be costs associated with getting the audit done, preparation for the audit. Sometimes those costs are internal. You can be paying employees to create policies and procedures. Maybe you're hiring a consultant to help you do that for you. But once your program is in place, the frameworks that you're certified to, they're going to evolve. There's going to be new controls, there's new risks, and so there's new requirements related to mitigating those risks. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to add budget or add staff or purchase more and more security controls or software. Next slide, please. So one way to sort of manage the budget and prevent that scenario we were just discussing a moment ago, getting the task completed on time is very critical. And part of that is doing an annual risk assessment. When you do that annual risk assessment, what you're doing is you're establishing how has the industry changed. Like right now, AI is a popular concept. There's a lot of new technologies using AI. More and more companies are trying to incorporate AI into how they do business, both in the products they sell and how they conduct their own business. That opens a new risk vector. So when you do your risk assessment and you look at how you're using AI in your organization, this is an area where you can say, okay, how do we address this? So during that risk assessment, you begin to identify all the required tasks that need to be completed, both for your audit, but also to mitigate those risks. You schedule them out for the year, you assign them to employees and say, okay, policies and procedures need to be updated by this date, then they need to be approved by this date, and then reviewed and acknowledged by employees at this date. And if you have that all organized, you can send out reminders, making sure employees are doing that on time. This is a very critical step. It seems obvious, and as I'm saying this, you may think, well, of course this is the right way to do it. But again, in our experience, a lot of organizations don't do this, or they intend to do it, but it just keeps getting pushed off until it's too late. Then when they're scrambling to complete those tasks, people start to take shortcuts. And when you take shortcuts, you begin to weaken your security program. And again, that's the goal, right? Compliance is evidence that you have a good security program. But the really important thing is that the security program is secure so that you don't have as many risks available. You want to make sure that when you're doing the vulnerability scans, you're scanning the right servers, that you're using the right tools, you're working with a good partner. It's not just, oh, we bought this inexpensive software and we did a real quick scan. You want to make sure that you're doing it effectively. Okay, next slide. All right, so basically a lot of what we're talking about is the more organized and efficient your ISMP is, the more successful it will be. So, in addition to scheduling things out in advance, keeping records of your assets, your trainings, your policies and procedures, keeping those up to date, stored in a central location where you can easily access them and monitor them is a big part of that as well. and then being able to monitor your progress throughout the year. Don't let it get away from you, because security is not a point in time thing like the audit. An audit may be something that happens once a year, but security is something that happens 24, 365, right? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It doesn't stop. So being able to monitor that progress is really important. So, a lot of audit programs require like policies and procedures be updated at least annually. And people focus on the annually part, but the at least part can sometimes be just as important. Because again, as new risks become evident, such as AI, you don't necessarily want to wait to update your policies about using, your employees using AI in their day jobs. That's something that you might want to address right away. Update your policy, update your procedures, notify employees, have them review and acknowledge it. Don't wait for that. Don't wait until you find out that an employee has uploaded sensitive, company information to ChatGPT. Right? Make sure they're trained on how to use that tool effectively and how to protect, proprietary information. So, streamlining the process, if you have everything stored in a central location where you can monitor and manage it, you can say, what does our policy say about AI? Okay, we don't have a policy for that. Or, well, we kind of address it, but it's not clear. It gives you an opportunity to immediately do that and get out in front of that challenge. Okay, next slide. So one of the benefits of having that strong security program and a compliance program that's built around having a successful security program is you actually get to potentially identify new frameworks that can open you up to new markets. So, a lot of times when you're selling to a client, if you're, say, just beginning to get into overseas sales, you might start getting asked about ISO 27001, where you have a SOC 2, which is very popular in the US, not as popular in international places, right? So if you have a good way of managing your compliance program, you can actually take a look at what the requirements are for additional frameworks. You can map them to your existing controls, your existing policies and procedures, and see what steps you need to take to comply with those new frameworks, potentially opening new doors, whether it's in the international space where ISO 27001, like I said, is popular. If you want to get into the EU specifically, GDPR comes into play. If you're looking to sell to federal, FedRAMP, CMMC, HITRUST is popular in healthcare. Being able to identify, to have good control over that program and identify potential to expand into other security frameworks really does open new markets. And for those who are used to filling out security questionnaires, it's kind of the bane of every ISO's existence, right? Oh, we have a new partner, we have a new client, here comes a new security questionnaire, it's 300 questions long. A lot of times when you have those certifications, it allows you to do a more streamlined version of the questionnaire, or sometimes you don't even have to complete a questionnaire if you have one of those security certifications. All right, next slide. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to turn things over to Marcos here, and I'm going to ask Marcos to share a screen, and we're going to demo some of the ways that the Ostendio platform can help accomplish some of those tasks.
Awesome.
So Marcos,
thanks, Kevin.
I think you're already on the audits module. That's good. It's a good place to start. So the audits module is a good place where you can identify the kind of recurring tasks. So, earlier I talked about, putting things on a schedule and ensuring employees complete tasks on time. Marcos, can you demonstrate how to do that with the audits module here?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I start, Kevin, if my connection starts to get a little unstable, just let me know so I can disable my video. Assigning those reoccurring tasks, or in this case, you're looking at our audits module, to employees is a really great way to start, especially picking up on the points that you've laid out for us. So you can see where I am here at the audits module, and I'm at manage audits. So I'm looking at a list of basically all the audits that I have in this instance of the Ostendio platform. So one of the examples I can just pull out would be like board documents for review, or an annual kiosk inspection. I'm basically just looking at one audit here from this list that I've just chosen, but I can click on another one like this one, for example, an as needed and monthly review of, once it loads here, you can see the title, remediation activities. This, in the description, you can see has a lot of information with how to conduct this audit. And then along the top, you'll see all the tabs that are giving you full control over how to execute this audit. But to kind of start, like where you would begin, if you created a new audit, you can do that from the add new, or you can do it from the side panel. But essentially, you can start by creating an audit based on your needs. And then you'll essentially just set up the audit based on how often you need this task to happen, whether it needs to go to, for example, one item at a time per owner, or whether one person is going to be working on all of the items themselves. So in this case, maybe if I go back here, I'm doing one annual kiosk inspection, but I'm doing it for multiple kiosks, right? And I have multiple audit items. It's not just one, it's multiple. So you could essentially say for this new audit that we're going to do, maybe I'm just going to say this is a monthly data review. Monthly data audit. And then from here, I'll say that I'm going to be responsible as a task owner for all of these tasks. Or if I needed help, I might actually say I'll individually name different owners to help me with this audit. I'm actually going to put myself for the whole thing. Monthly is the frequency I want, but if this was something else, maybe this was quarterly, I'll change that here. And then I can choose how often this happens, right? So I'm going to say every first month on the 8th day. I might maybe change that to the 11th. You can see now the system is going to be automatically going to choose when that begins on, when the first task due date is. I see this is a fixed cycle and it's never going to end, or I can change to say this is going to end by a certain time, or maybe after a certain time. I'm maybe going to say never because I want this to be an ongoing monthly task. And because I've set up these submission settings, I can now see a list of my cycles. So I'll know when to expect the next cycle for me to do the next audit tasks are. Of course, I don't always have to look just here. I'm going to be getting these notifications because I've set this up. But as I scroll through, you can see you can set, we give a certification, so how you know this task has been completed correctly. As a default, you can customize this message. And then this is where you choose those audit items. So ideally, you've already created these assets in the platform. You can see I can choose from this list of assets. So those were those kiosks I was talking about. I can select them here, add them to this audit. And then this is essentially going to say that this audit at this frequency is going to be looking at these audit items, and this owner is going to be working on this task. So if I created this right from here, this would set everything up for me, but I can go a little further. I can add this audit to any internal organizations, external organizations, any projects. Those modules exist here. And then of course, tags, right? If I need to tag this audit to a specific authority, framework, domain, maybe I know what the tag is itself, like CC 3.4, which is AICPA SOC 2. If I find that tag, it's going to automatically allow me to then just add this tag to this audit. So I can do that from here. If that was wrong, I can clear it. I can go back to these tags again. I can go and make sure that if there are any associated frameworks to that control. So if I do that same tag, but I'm also selecting all these other frameworks, all these other frameworks are going to then crosswalk because this is related to a lot of these other controls. Because I don't need all these, I can just uncheck them and turn them off. But let's say I wanted to cross map all of those, I can then add those selected tags, and now they're already there for me. Really fast, simple way to be able to work with those controls in one space. And pretty quickly. Of course, if I need any other attachments, let's say for instructions or snapshots, I can add that here and add my audit. I actually did one of these earlier before I started this presentation, so we can take a look at one of those that I created before this. And once it loads here, you'll see I created this one, the quarterly review and update of access asset lists. We'll probably look at this a little bit later, but you can see here, I have one audit item, which is a sample software asset that's listed here. My audit tasks would be listed here within the cycles. And then anytime I've submitted any of these audit tasks, you'll see them here. Essentially, all of those come to a pending action. So anytime I'm assigned or a user is assigned to them, you can see all of your pending actions for any audits here, and then you can work to submit them. by clicking on the submit button. Or of course, when you go to home, you can see all your pending actions and what you'll need to do. So all the instructions will be in here. I don't have any issues found, or I do have issues to report, in which case I can add my evidence, my note, I can add attachments, or if I need to create a ticket, I can create a ticket from here or link an existing ticket if I've been working on some of that evidence and just add it to the audit itself. So all of the record of all the work that I do will be here. And then of course, you get notifications from the system. This is a personal example of one that I have due in a day. So by this Friday, I've got a monthly data integrity audit to submit. So you can see this is the exact thing I would get. And this is how the system not only alerts you, but also gives you a link to immediately take you to that audit to perform your action.
So Marcus, why don't we go back to the software sample that you had for a moment? I want to talk about that for a little bit because, in my experience, a lot of organizations, when they think of assets, they think of hardware devices, but assets can be so much more. They can be software applications. They can even be organizations, partners, clients, vendors, whatever. But for software applications, I think one of the things that a lot of organizations lose control over as they grow, as employees are onboarded and offboarded, is how different users' access to different external platforms needs to be enabled or disabled. So as employees are offboarded, you want to remove them from assets. As they're onboarded, they want to be added to assets. Can you show an example of an access list within an asset, how it's updated, and then how that evidence is kept within the platform?
Absolutely. One that I use a lot is the one you see on the screen right now called Miro. It's an online whiteboard essentially, but it gives you much more control than that. We use it a lot for wireframing, for even just brainstorming and pulling out ideas. And it's recently got AI capabilities, so it's expanded how much creativity I have to use it, especially for product development. But in that way, you're exactly right. I could have maybe 14 guests and maybe 6 different members, and sometimes those people move back and forth, and they have different license requirements. I'm paying for some, not paying for others. Some people have different access to that application than others. So how do you manage all of it? Within Ostendio, you can create the asset within the assets module, which is the record you see here. You can either add new from the top, just like before. You can add a new asset on the fly, or if you're here, right, you can immediately see all the assets that you're managing. This is an example of one that I made based on Miro. So it's a SaaS application. It's online. Of course, you can see all the tabs here that indicate all the information based on this asset, like its business impact, its privacy impact, the files associated to it. But really what we want to look at right now is this access list. The access list basically lets you know, what users within Ostendio that you've provisioned have access to this application. So in this case, there's about 4 users or 4 records here in the access list response table. And you can see that we have the ability to control what access roles they have. So within, most applications, you have like site admin, admin, and users. But that's not true for all applications. There might be a content creator, a content editor. There might be, a specific access role that's unique to that application you have, that's different from others. So being able to go to, for example, your system settings, when you scroll down to the bottom of role management settings is where you can configure roles for the entire platform. When you're here, you actually can then go to the access lists and be able to change all of the different roles that you have available in any asset, so that if I needed to manage the access role, and even from right here, I can see a full list of all these users. I can actually then create a new role from here and be able to then choose it from this dropdown so that it's unique to this asset. But then also as I'm updating and adding users, it's inherently accurate to that asset. So I'm not just adding, let's say system admin, when system admin doesn't exist in Miro, right? So it's accurate to that list. And then when you're offboarding and onboarding users, it's going to make those changes for you here. So if you're making those changes within an offboarding or onboarding ticket, the system will take that action for you. Actually, one of the best ways to do that is by looking at a system access request ticket. A system access request ticket actually allows you to make those changes, whether you're granting access or whether you're revoking access to a user for that asset. So you just saw me go to basically create a new ticket. I'm actually here at our system templates. So this is already already pre-created for you. If you just go to system access request, for example, it'll already create the ticket for you. Because I'm creating it actually from this asset, it's going to automatically select that for me. And it's basically going to create the ticket to say, someone is requesting access or someone needs to be revoked access from this asset. So from here, I can basically choose that Miro application that you saw here. And then I can choose, well, who's requesting the access, or who needs to be removed from that access. And then you can see that the system is essentially already providing for you that kind of English language, is asking to revoke permission from this user, because as we saw earlier, Annie already has access to this asset. So because she already has access to this asset, by me creating this, I'm essentially just looking to remove her from this. And then all I need to do is assign the owner of that asset, which is me. If it wasn't, I would select that owner. The system will automatically do that for you. And then when this ticket gets created, the person who's assigned this ticket, the owner, is going to get a notification to approve or reject this ticket. So they're going to approve my revoking Annie from this asset. Once they do that, the system will automatically take the action for you. So instead of having to take a few extra steps, a few extra clicks of saying, oh, it's one thing to say I need this person removed and they need to have this specific role. I can actually just from here approve this ticket. It's going to remove that access. And then from here, I'm going to close out, and then Annie will no longer have access to this asset. So it's a really quick way to remove or to add. And when you're adding, it gives them, again, that very specific access. So it's accurate to the asset that you have. I just have to refresh. And then now you'll see Annie's removed from there. So if I wanted to add somebody else, it's basically going to make sure that it chooses from this list here. So it's a really quick and easy way. The tickets really help to support that. But of course, when you're onboarding and offboarding, that's going to really set the first ticket to take action on.
The other advantage of the ticket is it also reminds you to go to the external application and synchronize the access list there with what you have in the platform. And you can create those audit tasks that will allow you to send out a monthly reminder to asset owners to say, double check your asset list, make sure that any offboarded employees have been removed so that they don't still have access to that information. Very critical to a strong security program, maintaining access to all those assets, not just internal, not just hardware, but external as well. So thank you for that, Marcus. That was a good demonstration of the assets module and how it relates to the audit task. Another example that I think would be helpful would be for training. So, we talked about AI. It presents a new risk vector. So a lot, for a lot of organizations, we see, they have a recurring annual training program, but it's important to go back and refresh that training program and to look at the new, any new threats, any new risks that are in the industry. So, could you maybe demonstrate how you use an audit task to do an annual refresh of the training, and then how to, talk about how you would access your external training module or external training platform to take a look at what options are available?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because we've already covered the audit module, essentially once you create that audit task, you want to associate it to, in this case, a training artifact, right? So we've already set up a couple of trainings here. I'm looking at my manage all training as an admin, so I can see every training that's been made in the system. And if I was just taking this one, for example, a bind configuration management training, you can see all the information of how it's set up. Once I've associated this to that audit, it's essentially coming in, like you're saying, and setting up this training, the way that it needs to be set up according to your use case. So if this is for KnowBe4, prior to this, I looked online and saw that they had an artificial intelligence driven phishing training that they're going to be rolling out. At least they did earlier in May. For most of the trainings themselves, right, we want to have some sort of quiz internally. So you can build out a quiz internally to Ostendio if you wanted additional questions. But if you're familiar with KnowBe4, the training takes place externally in their websites. So in order for a user within Ostendio to take that quiz, essentially you just have to add that link as a file. So the URL to that training will be here. That URL to that training will take them there to complete it. And then all they have to do is upload the certificate to this training in order to show the evidence of them completing it. But of course, you can always add on additional quiz questions to it. So if you wanted to add another layer of internal questions outside of just that know before training, you can add that by creating a quiz. And then of course, when you set up your training, you're going to see all the submissions. So a record of everyone who's taking the training and that they've submitted it here within this artifact. You can see a summary of any record of people who have been added to the training, when they got added, when their next submission due date is. Setting up the training at an annual basis is a pretty common use case. You can see that when we create a training, our submission settings, which is maybe about 3/4 of the way in, once you've set up the initial description of the training, you'll see once I get here, gives you a lot of control on that scheduling. So I'm just going to go past the training materials. This is where you would add that URL, that link to know before training, that would add it to the files there. But you can see here right at the submission settings, I'm going to choose a yearly training. So this is annual. I might want this at the top of the year. Maybe I want this on the very first day. Actually, that's kind of a little ridiculous. It's New Year's. I'll maybe put the last day. So this is the last day of every January. It's going to be then a fixed schedule because we're basically saying every January. And then I have the option and flexibility to choose the training first due date. So even though I'm going to say this is January 1st, I can set this to start on November and then go every cycle after that. I can choose when this becomes available for users, because if this happens prior to that, this is essentially a scheduled training until it becomes pending. So when do I want this to become available for my users? Whether I want this to end or not, right? This is very similar to how you would set up for an audit, like we saw before, those same configurations. If you were doing this instead as maybe like a one-time training, you have that option too. So these were the more reoccurring ones. If you wanted to find something that was more fixed one time and you were going to update this differently, you could schedule a one time, and you can see then it actually changes based on whether the training due date is relative or whether it's fixed. And the system will actually give you explicit language showing you when this training is going to be available for what users. So if your use case is you want everyone to have the same due date, or maybe you want people to have a due date that's relative from when they join, the system gives you a lot of control based on your use case. So whether it's annually, everyone completes it within 14 days, right, of them getting hired. They have 14 days, that's their expectation to do it. The system can calculate that for you, make sure that everyone gets it appropriately and they complete it on time. And then of course, the system will make sure to track whether they have completed it on time when their last submission is. And of course, within the system, you can run custom reports and system reports that'll help give you a snapshot of being able to see that your users have completed that training on time. All you have to do is just make sure that you set up that you're consumers. So one of the things that we recommend that you do is, instead of adding users individually at a time, like once you hire someone, you're manually adding each user. If you actually use our dynamic groups, so for example, all US employees, I'm just going to add this dynamic group here. The beauty of this is that anytime you've onboarded a new user and they go into that dynamic group, they're automatically going to get associated to any training or really any artifact where that dynamic group is associated. So you don't have to do that manually anymore. If you've onboarded someone, they're automatically going to get all the trainings, documents, et cetera, that you need throughout the platform.
One of the features I think is very helpful for a lot of organizations is you showed the scheduling. You don't want all your employees to suddenly have a dozen trainings to do in 1 month or even in 1 quarter. So we're able to schedule those across, like, let's say you have a dozen that you need to do per year. You can break them up into quarters so that each quarter they only have maybe 3 trainings to do. They can do them once a month or something like that, rather than just suddenly like, okay, March 1st has come and now I've got 12 trainings that are due, at the end of this month or next month. That's part of like the scheduling out in advance and having control of that. Because when you spread those things out, it's less painful for your employees to complete things on time, rather than, the audit's coming up, we got to get all of our trainings in, and now you've got, 100 employees or 200 employees, you're chasing them down, you're emailing them, you're calling them, you need to get this training done, you need to get this training done. It's a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted energy doing that. Scheduling it in advance and being able to structure it this way really ensures a much cleaner, smoother process. It's going to save you time, which is going to save you money in the long run.
Exactly. And of course, from every training, you can always send a message to all those users who have been added to the training. So here I can just hit send a message and I can choose specifically which groups of people I need to speak to. Is it all custodians? Is it all owners, all administrators, consumer, only those that are compliant, non-compliant? Exactly.
Yep. So it's a very useful tool to staying on top of your compliance program. And again, if something comes up, like a new security risk comes up and you want to change that schedule, you can do that. You can send out a note, you can adjust the due date, you can send out a notification saying there's new training, it needs to be completed in X number of days. A lot of flexibility with this module here. Thank you for that, Marcos. I think the next area we can talk about is along the lines of training, policies and procedures. So oftentimes some companies might have one document that's full of all the different policies and procedures. For a lot of companies, they'll have several different documents. Different employees have to review different documents. They have to acknowledge them. You have the owner who maybe needs to update it on a schedule, different approvers. Can you demonstrate specifically how a policy can be assigned to an owner to review them annually, have them approved by management once they're updated, and then acknowledged by employees so that they are aware of any changing policies?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a variety of documents that you'll see here, very similar to what we've been seeing in the audits module, asset training. Now we're in documents. That response view that you see here is showing you all those documents. You can think of documents in Ostendio as kind of like a folder. The document itself can have files within it. And so, for example, this SPP, Business Continuity Disaster Recovery document here, there's one document in this. And I know that because once I go in here and go to files, you'll see that I've got one record, but I can keep adding files to this document here. So I can have multiple documents that I'm working on. It's a nice workspace to be able to work either independently as an owner, or like you said, if there are custodians, people I want to work on this with. It's in draft status right now. So, this is something I can work on because we have an internal editor in the Ostendio platform. I can just click on this, start working on this document, leave comments, collaborate with people just like you would in Google or Microsoft, anywhere else, but you're doing it within the Ostendio platform. So you're not having to download another version or worry if it's the right version. I can work on it here with people within Ostendio. And then when I'm ready, I can actually then create an approval process. So like you said earlier, I can start by just creating one approver, right? And maybe this one approver is going to help me with this draft, so that once this draft is ready, then we can take this to go for a much wider approval. So acknowledgement. So an acknowledgement for a certain group of employees, or maybe it's your organization wide. So it's like your handbook or a policy that everybody needs to acknowledge. So here I'm starting my first approval process. Your approval type in this case, there's only one person, but let's say I had 2 or 3 other people that were optional, but I only have one person that's mandatory, they need to do that, or one person that's authorized. The difference between these two, of course, is whether or not you need one person's approval to just make this all go through, or whether you need multiple people to approve it, mandatory, authorized, or optional. Once I've done this and I start the approval process, I'm not going to be able to make those edits. It's locked. It's waiting for that approver to make sure that they go. They'll see this immediately in their pending actions, depending, of course, on when that due date is set. Then they can take that action to approve, review the document. Once this is approved, then I can work to publishing it. But even in this case, I just kind of glossed over that, you would have your own file, you would just add it from here. The Ostendio platform gives you a list of different template policies and procedures, depending on your plan within the platform. So for example, right now, if you just go kind of the 4th one down, look at templates, you'll see here that I can select between different types of templates. One of the examples that you just saw here actually was, let's just look at a risk management one. I can just click on this risk management template. I'm going to let the system know I'm going to download it. Of course, I'm going to read every single word in line from this agreement terms, which I just did in record speed. And then once I accept those terms and download this template, it's not going to download to my computer. I don't have to go back and update this. I'm just going to click and manage my document. This is immediately going to take this template policy and procedure, add it into my instance as an artifact. And the same way you were just looking at me navigate this earlier, I can go into that artifact now, which is right here at the top of my list. And I can begin editing that template. I can start changing it to fit my organization's needs. go back to that approvers tab, work with some folks within my organization to make sure this works. Maybe I might even have to chat with them a little bit back and forth. So I might say, Annie, I don't know if you saw that pending action, but I need your help approving this document. I send that off to her. That sends her another email. So she'll get 2 emails to make sure that she looks at that approver process to get that completed. And then once it's done, I can publish this. When it's published, I have the opportunity to, of course, change the consumers. Just like I said earlier, I might say this is all employees. So all employees need to be able to acknowledge this document. All of those consumers are going to get that pending action once this is published as a document that they need to acknowledge. So that's going to enable them to similarly go here, take a look at the document, review it, and then you'll see a take action button similar to like we did earlier. And that's going to let them acknowledge that they've reviewed the document for its completeness.
Now, Marcos, you've shown several different modules. You haven't even gotten through them all here today in the limited time we have. But I know this can feel overwhelming to a lot of organizations. How do I manage all these different modules, assets, documents, and so on? Can you demonstrate, how the Ostendio platform provides a means to manage kind of all of that from one central dashboard?
Exactly that I feel like the term itself, just how to manage compliance, is where we took that. Or you can see on the screen, compliance manager. So hearing that need from users is where we wanted to take this module to its furthest. We launched this near the end of last year. At the moment, the compliance manager works to help you find anything compliant or non-compliant throughout your platform for all artifacts as it relates to any framework that you're working against. Right now, you can select up to 5 frameworks. I'm just going to select one right now. Actually, I'll select a couple more so you can see what this looks like. The first step is really choosing some of those frameworks. So here you can see whether they're SCF versions or whether they're internal versions. So I'm just going to click on maybe ISO, and then I'll click on one more. I'll find NIST maybe. Here we go. So now I'm looking at 3 different frameworks. And the reason for looking at these frameworks is because all of the artifacts that are tagged to these frameworks or have controls related to these frameworks will show up here in 4 different views. You can see any of your non-compliant or compliant artifacts based on their module. So if it's easier for you to say, I really need to work on documents. So I'm looking for non-compliant documents. You can do that here in module view. If you're familiar with the domain and you're maybe more assigned to working on compliance based on that framework for a specific domain. So let's say human resources security. Or if you are working specifically to the control, you're assigned a list of controls and you've divided them amongst your team, you can look at them control by control. Or let's say you have a specific set of users that you need to make sure are compliant. So this is a list of all the users within the platform, and you need to confirm that all of these folks need to become compliant. All of these red dots show that something is non-compliant. By clicking on any of these dropdowns, you can see what is non-compliant. You can see the reason for that non-compliance, and then you can initiate a fix path, which the system will then allow you to go directly to that artifact to fix that non-compliance. Now, in this case, this user, Ron, is non-compliant. They have an overdue training that they haven't acknowledged. So in this case, I can just send Ron a message. I'll let them know they have overdue actions. I actually didn't even have to type anything. The system's automatically going to do that. I can preview to see what that message is going to look like for Ron when it goes to system. I'm actually in a demo environment right now, so it's not opening for me, but it essentially shows you that same email preview that looked like this. So it'll say, hey, Ron, you've got this task. It takes them directly to that action. And then I can send off the message. 2 clicks, I was pretty much there. And I don't have to do it for just one user. I could do this for all users within this list. They're all going to get the unique number of non-compliant artifacts that are associated to them with their own links. So in one click, I can basically just email all of my users in my platform and let them know what they are non-compliant against. That way, as I'm working against these frameworks, I can essentially use the compliance manager to, again, find those artifacts, help to make sure they become compliant as quickly as possible. Once we fix those, then essentially the end all for compliance manager is you've gone through the system, you've worked to eradicate non-compliance, and maybe you could take all of this work that you've done and create an assessment. because now you feel confident that you can take the evidence you have, the work you've done, immediately turn this into an assessment. This will be turned as an internal assessment, but you can always take this afterward, clone it, and then turn it for an external assessment as well. So the compliance manager, again, looks throughout the platform where you've assigned any of those artifacts, tags, or controls to specific frameworks. And then it helps you to become essentially compliant against those frameworks, very simply by organizing them in a way for you to find them quickly. And then, of course, to be able to take action on them, whether it's you or whether it's you letting somebody know the action they need to take.
Thank you, Marcos. I know that was a bit of just a high overview there, but thank you for the demonstration. We really appreciate it, and turn it back over to Miranda.
Yeah, thanks, Marcos. That was great to be able to see it all happening live. Really appreciate that. We have a few questions that have come in from people that are on our live stream and also on our Zoom call. With the first question, and I'm not sure if it's something that Marcos has prepared. I don't know if you can show us this or if perhaps Kevin can just talk to it. But the question was about allowing for auditors to view and collaborate on the platform. Is that something you can talk about, Kevin?
So we don't allow auditors to access the client's information. That would be, there's a variety of problems with that. But when you create the assessment in the platform, the auditor and the organization can collaborate through the assessment. So they can create the assessment in the platform, share it externally with the auditor, and then evidence can be attached to that assessment. The auditor can review that evidence, and they can, ask their questions through that assessment. That way there is that sort of collaboration. They can pull the evidence right out of the platform and put it into the assessment, but the auditor is not seeing all that back end communication and configuration.
So I think one of the questions we were getting is about how you can actually work with your auditor on the platform. So when you are undergoing an audit, the auditor is able to chat with you through the Ostendio platform rather than sending documents separately by email. Is that correct?
You want to address that, Marcos?
Yeah, that's correct. So a lot of those features that you saw there for collaboration, like when I opened the chat, when you're in the assessments module, I mean, the auditor's main responsibility is to look through and find based on their answers, right? Whether it's accept or reject or a neutral option. But as they're going through, they may want to leave comments, they may want to leave notes. And so to your point, Miranda, being able to communicate in one space and not externally, it keeps all the information there. And also, Kevin, to your point, right? Like it protects the client data, it protects the way they set up the assessment. The idea is that they set up the assessment ready for the auditor to review. And they may go through it a few times. You can go through a draft and do a rehearsal if you'd like. But when it's showtime and the auditor wants to make sure that it's exactly the way that it looks. So they go through it, they give it accurate to the way it's set up. They don't have to worry too much about having to change things or control things. It keeps it a pretty simple workflow for them, but it does allow them to collaborate in one space.
Unfortunately, we didn't have time to really demo the assessments module in that capacity today. But if anyone's interested, we could always set up a demo with our sales team to kind of walk through and show how that works.
Yeah, that's great. Or possibly another webinar, Kevin.
Possibly another webinar.
Yeah. For a repeat performance. The other question, another question came in during the time that we were talking about training and we were looking at the training module. Is know before included with an Ostendio account? And if they have their own training, if a customer has their own training, is that also easy to add into the Ostendio platform?
So we can link to any external training. There's a way to do that. I think Marco showed the hyperlink feature earlier, where within the Ostendio platform, they can click a link that'll take them to the external training platform. The question about is know before included, that gets into pricing. So depending on the platform level that you buy, know before may be included, or you may have to pay an additional fee to get access to know before. But we do have the ability to include know before with the purchase of the platform. So you don't have to purchase it separately. That's but right. If you do purchase it separately, you can use your existing subscription. You don't have to purchase it again.
Good stuff. And then also we would like to just answer one more question, which is about building security into your culture. We had someone ask about how do you convince your executive about the importance of security being part of your organization's culture, Kevin?
Building off of the cliche, there's two types of organizations, those that have been breached and those that will be breached. So, the importance of a security culture is understanding that, like when we talk about things like business continuity, incident response, you need to have a plan and you need to test those plans, because you got to work under the assumption that eventually there's going to be some kind of a breach. It may be a small breach. It may be an employee shared a document with, a partner that they shouldn't have shared, or it may be that somebody hacks into your platform and they've exposed client records. So you have to plan for those types of things potentially happening and know that you have a way to react to that. Who's responsible to contact clients? Who's responsible to contact law enforcement? How are you going to disable access? Do you have a chain to contact people to, bring everybody in and have meetings and discuss how you're going to respond? There's a lot of things that you need to prepare for that. And certainly, getting everybody to understand the importance of it can be a challenge, but, getting executives to understand the cost of a breach. And I know our Twitter feed talks about a lot of these. The cost of a breach is much higher than the cost of preparing for a breach. That's really what it comes down to. And, it's not to make it about money all the time, but let's face it, that's a driving motivating factor for a lot of executives. You're going to save money in the long run. I probably shouldn't name names, but there's a large pharmaceutical company that had a breach a few years ago, and they were shut down for months. Different aspects of their business were shut down for months. They lost, I don't even know if you could put a number on how much money they lost, because they had been part of a ransomware attack. And just go read about any ransomware attack, the amount of money lost in a ransomware attack, lost business, lost trust with your clients, building from scratch. Sometimes you have to start over. Sometimes you're not able to recover. So you have to be able to assume that these things are a very real possibility. We put our seatbelts on when we're driving a car. We don't expect to be in a car accident every day, but statistics show us that more than likely we're going to be in a car accident someday. And I know for me personally, I want to have my seatbelt on when that happens, right? So it's a very similar type of situation.
That is a great analogy to wrap up with there today. Thanks so much. One of the things that has been great today is being able to see the platform and how it works real time. So that was great to get that from you today. So thank you both very much for joining us. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate your time. You can also please join us on LinkedIn, where you will get all the up-to-date news about Ostendio, the offers that we have, the resources that we offer all of our clients. That's a wrap for today's webinar. Thank you for joining. We will have more webinars. We expect to, or are busy planning our next September webinar. So please join us for them. But in the meantime, have a great day. Thanks for joining.